Hello and welcome to Bourbon Rocks. Tonight we're going to review Elmer T. Lee from Buffalo Trace. Now this is another single barrel bourbon from Buffalo Trace's mash bill number 1, which is their higher rye mash bill. It's a medium rye mash bill, but it's higher than their low rye, obviously. So it's the same mash bill with Blanton's and Rock Hill Farms, for example. It is the mash bill which is owned by the Japanese, but is still made by Buffalo Trace. Now we're going to compare this single barrel bourbon to Blanton's, which is the essentially gold standard for mash bill number 2. Now I think this bourbon is personally fairly overhyped. It's extremely expensive. It's not produced as much as Blanton's, and so it's harder to find, and therefore it's going to be more expensive. But is it worth the price? Is it as good as Blanton's? Now, this is bottled at about 90 proof. Typical Blanton's, the original single barrel Blanton's, is bottled at 93 proof. There's also the Blanton's Gold, which is bottled at 103 proof, and then you've got the Blanton's straight from the barrel, which can come up into the 120s and so forth. It's obviously going to vary, but it's usually up into the 120s. And there's definitely an amazing a lot of flavor coming out of the Blanton's straight from the barrel, and pretty amazing flavors also coming from the Blanton's Gold. Now, I personally love Blanton's all forms. I think the original single barrel Blanton's is fantastic. So can Elmer T. Lee, which is a younger product, it's non-age stated like the Blanton's. It's estimated around 5 to 7 years. It can be up to 9 years, but it's probably running around the 5 to 6 year range. So it's probably just a tad bit younger, a year or two younger than the Blanton's. And it's bottled at about 3 proof points lower. So we're going to see how it compares. There's a lot of hype around this bourbon. Again, it's more expensive than Blanton's because it's more rare, more obscure, and harder to find. So this is Elmer T. Lee, single barrel from mash bill number 2 at Buffalo Trace. By the way, it's named after Elmer T. Lee, who was a master distiller and maybe the president, definitely the distiller, years back at what was the Stag Distillery, which of course today is Buffalo Trace. Elmer T. Lee actually created Blanton's, the first single barrel bourbon, in 1984, which was named after Colonel Blanton, who was a leader, distiller, president, I forget which one, at the Stag Distillery prior to Elmer T. Lee. But this bourbon was released later than Blanton's. Of course, Blanton's being the original single barrel bourbon, this is much later, but 2 is a single barrel bourbon. Now, Blanton's is all stored and aged in Warehouse H, which is the metal-clad warehouse at Buffalo Trace. I don't know exactly where the Elmer T. Lee is aged, but supposedly not in Warehouse H, so that's going to change some of the flavors. Warehouse H, being that's metal-clad, is going to age faster because of the changes in temperature, heats up faster, cools off faster, and supposedly ages the Blanton's more than its typical age. And that wouldn't necessarily be the case here with the Elmer T. Lee if it's not aged in Warehouse H. So first we look at the color in our Glencairn glass. You may notice it's kind of a light orange, maybe just a tad bit lighter than the Blanton's. The body is medium. Not much different than the Blanton's so far. I would look at this and probably not be able to tell you just by looking at it in a glass any difference. When we nose it, now I get a little apple here. Now I didn't get apple typically in a Blanton's. Like a green apple, might be a little bit of caramel. There's definitely the caramels there, some caramel apple maybe. There's a corniness, there's that graininess of corn, which implies that it's perhaps a bit younger. Now, I think Elmer T. Lee, from what I've read, used to be 9 years. Maybe it was even age stated at 9 years. But as the demands increased and the production, Buffalo Trace production cannot keep up with the demand, they've started using younger and younger bourbons. And so there is no age statement, and it's really thought closer probably to 5 years now. And I think he knows that. There is more of a graininess. I don't get that in the Blantons. It smells a little younger. See if that comes out in the taste. There's not a lot of spice here. There's maybe a little bit of cinnamon, but it's not that much. All right, let's see what we got on the palate. A little bit of sherry, again some pear. We had apple on the nose, a little pear on the palate. Those aren't flavors that I typically get out of the Blantons, but I am getting a little bit in this Elmer T. Lee here. It's a bit thin on flavor. There's maybe some marzipan. It tastes a little younger and a little thinner. Some caramel candy, maybe a little, like almost some buttered cornbread. It's not incredibly sweet. It's not really incredibly fruity. It's got some of Blanton's characteristics. You definitely have just the standard bourbon flavors. There's the oak, the corn, the vanilla, the caramel, but everything is just thin, much thinner than the Blantons. Some unique flavors with the pear and the apples, which I don't attribute. Not the cherry that you get more with Blantons. I don't get that here. So it has some of the same characteristics, maybe a little bit slightly different fruit character, but it's just thin. It's thin and weak in the finish. I thought it was rather relatively short. Let me give that another taste and see what we get on the finish. It's short to medium. There's that sort of caramel corn, and there's still that kind of grainy corn flavor, but it's sweeter on the finish, maybe almost a candy-ish flavor. Hate to use candy corn because candy corn is basically just high fructose corn syrup, but that's maybe what you get here. It's just slightly sweetened corn. It's all right. So I guess let me put a grade to Elmer T. Lee, and I think people watching this video may be a little disappointed. I'm going to give it a Jack. Jack of all trades. I would call this just a daily drinker. Now the problem is, this really can't be a daily drinker because it's very expensive. It's very hard to come by. It doesn't show up very often on the shelf. It doesn't show up very often in drops. Come around occasionally in the lottery. You can buy it on the internet, but you're going to pay probably 4 or 5 times the list price. It's very expensive, but it is not worth it. I can tell you straight up that Elmer T. Lee, in my opinion, is probably the most overrated Buffalo Trace product that I've ever had. You've got Blantons, you've got Eagle Rare. In my opinion, they're underrated. You say, well, people love them. Yes, they're very good. They're extremely good. There's a reason why they're hyped, because they are both very, very good. The reason why Blantons and Eagle Rare don't sit on the shelf very long is because they're both extraordinarily good and well worth the money. E.H. Taylor in the lower end, the small batch, I think is overrated. When you get up to the single barrel and the barrel proof, that's definitely worth it. But I believe of all the overhyped Buffalo Trace products, and you could make the argument that the entire distillery is overhyped, and that may be true in that almost none of them are truly worth the secondary internet prices that you pay. Even the Pappies, even the Wellers, the B-Tax, which are extraordinarily good bourbons, some of the best you'll ever have, still may not be worth what people pay for it on the internet. But you get an exceptionally good bourbon if you want to put the money out for it. But I don't think what you're going to pay for Elmer T. Lee on the internet is going to be anywhere close to worth it. This is a don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking the bourbon itself. I call it a daily drinker. I absolutely will drink this, and anytime someone has it, I'll have it. It's a good bourbon. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just doesn't live up to its hype, and it's certainly not to its cost. And why? Honestly, because it's just thin. You know, it's got good flavors. It's got typical bourbon flavors. There's a couple of interesting notes with the apple and the pear, but it's just so thin. There just really isn't enough to carry it through and to give you deliver that punch of bourbon goodness that you're really looking for. So it's an average bourbon. You know, it's a good daily drinker. If you win the lottery and get it at list price, it is definitely worth list price, but I wouldn't pay a whole lot extra money for it. I'm going to give it a Jack Daily Drinker. It's a good bourbon. It's just a little bit too thin to be exceptional. And that's Elmer T. Lee from Buffalo Trace, Mash Bill number 2. A single barrel bourbon like Blanton's, but nowhere near as good as Blanton's. So check us out on bourbonrocks.com. Thank you very much.